Good day, good people. My name is Brad King, and you are listening to the Downtown Writers Jam video podcast. Max the Dog and I are coming to you from deep inside the bunker, which is in varying states of disrepair at this moment. Today, we have a good one. I'm excited because we have Peter Quinn on the show. Now, I didn't know Peter before I got the email about him, but as soon as I read his bio, I was like, holy shit, I got to have this guy in the program. So, his 1995 American Book Award winning novel, Banished Children of Eve, is being republished for the third time. Uh, and that's great. And I cannot wait to read this. And after you hear this interview, you are absolutely going to want to read this book. But what really excited me was that he is a magazine guy from New York City from back in the day. So before I tell you why that's important, let me tell you a little bit about him. So he's a novelist, a historian, and he's a chronicle of New York City. He's the author of Looking for Jimmy, In Search of Irish America, and a trilogy of historical detective novels, Hour of the Cat, The Man Who Never Returned, and Dry Bones. He's, like I said, a historian, and he spent his life chronicling New York because his family's been there for a really long time, and he's been involved in a lot of cool shit that you probably come across. I'm not going to tell you about it now, but we're going to talk about it on the show. Before we get to all that, as you know, a couple things. So the Jam comes out every Wednesday. So make sure you get subscribed to wherever you listen to podcasts so you don't miss that. There's two things you can do to help us out. Tell your friends about us. Leave us a written review wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also head on over to our Facebook page. Make sure you leave a review there, or you can leave us a testimonial through the website, through the contact page. While you're there, you can do a couple things. You can check out this video podcast series, which comes out about every Monday and Friday. We also release that on the Solid Listen Network YouTube channel, or you can watch it at the website. You can buy the book of anybody who's been on the program by clicking on the bookshop link. Looking for a book to read, we got book reviews up there. You can sign up for our monthly newsletter, and you can support everybody on the Solid Listen Network by clicking on that Patreon button. When you do that for just a couple bucks a month, you get book recommendations, commercial-free episodes, happy hours, cool stuff that everybody on the network is doing. So get signed up for that. I'm super excited today. So I'm running through the normal stuff. So one of the guys who taught at the University of California, Berkeley School of Journalism, where I went, if you listen to the show, I mention that every once in a while, is a guy named Clay Felker. Clay basically founded like a whole bunch of magazines in New York. And I went to Berkeley to study under Bill Drummond. And while I was there, I met Clay. And Clay was older at the time and he was sick. And I wasn't actually in the magazine program, even though I wanted to be in that. Would I go back, I would have done things a little bit differently. I was doing the new media stuff, which focused a lot on news, but like I wanted to be a long form writer. Like that's what I desperately wanted to do. And like I would corner Clay whenever I could and talk to him. And he was so gracious with his time. And you know, I don't know what he was like in real life. I don't know what kind of person he was. I only know those interactions that we had influenced a lot about where my career went. Like Bill Drummond was clearly the driving force in that, Paul Grabowitz driving force in that, but Clay was just one of those dudes. And so when I was reading about Peter in the magazine world out in New York, I was like, oh my God, like, did you know Clay? And of course it's a small world. So he had come across him, but they weren't friends. But they knew each other. Years later, Clay's wife, Gail, came to Ball State when I was running the magazine department or the student magazine. And she ended up befriending the three students who ran the magazine. And it was the year we won the Pulitzer for the biggest college award for student magazines. And one of them ended up moving to New York, and she and Gail became friends. So like Felker, Gail, or like people that have loomed sort of like these giant stars in my career. So anyway, getting to talk to somebody from New York who's both a historian, who's a long form writer, who has that stuff in magazines was just super fucking exciting for me. And you're going to see me getting super excited during this interview. And I would apologize, except for that I don't really care because I was giddy. And I think you will too. And I think you're going to want to pick up Banished Children of Eve, and probably try to get your hands on everything he's done. So it's an exciting day in the bunker. And I appreciate you taking some time to stop by, spend some time with Max and I, and I hope you're taking care of yourself. I hope your house or your apartment or wherever you're living is in way better fucking shape than mine, because apparently everything is falling apart. But we will get that fixed because that's what we do. I hope you're taking care of yourself and each other. Hope you're getting the vaccine, doing all the stuff that we need to do. If you've gotten the shot, I hope that you're getting to see your loved ones, because how important is that, right? Like, that's the one thing we've learned this last year. Like, our people are the most important things in our lives. So I appreciate you spending a little bit of your time with us. For now, sit back and enjoy my conversation with Peter Quinn.
I was at Time Inc., Time Warner for 23 years. So
yeah.
I met a lot of people.
Yeah. Well, when I saw that you did that, I'm like, oh, well, Clay was around that magazine world there for New York for a while. Like,
it can be a small world, you know?
Yeah, it really, for as big as all this stuff is, it really is like, you just start.
Publishing in New York is a strange world.
Yeah. Well, and most of my career was in San Francisco and California. And so I've tried to explain to people, like, the two worlds are the same, but they never really meet.
Are you from the South?
My family is from, my family settled large parts of Kentucky.
Okay.
I actually grew up in Ohio, but I grew up in the part of Ohio where the migration happened. Okay. So I sound like this, even though I'm from Ohio.
You're down around Cairo down there?
What's that?
You're down around Cairo? Is that how they pronounce it? Cairo?
Oh, it's my Clay County is about 40 minutes north of the Tennessee border.
Okay.
So it's out there in like east, like it's essentially where all the poor part of Kentucky is. That's my family.
Well, I grew up in a little town called the Bronx.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is all of that's, it's so interesting. And I know it's been more interesting for you, but I went there in the 90s. And then when I went back a few years ago, I was like, it's like Brooklyn. It's like a whole different, like,
right.
None of that looks like it did even 20 years ago. So I can't even imagine what you've seen.
Well, I grew up in the 50s in the Bronx. I went to school from grammar school to graduate school in the Bronx.
Yeah.
My great-grandmother was born in Fordham in 1863. So we've been in the Bronx a long time.
A long time. So is that why Fordham is because they're re-releasing the book? Like, is it, yeah. You guys have a deep relationship to them?
Well, I actually went to another college, Manhattan College, which is in the Bronx. But yeah, I know a lot of people at Fordham, and you know, my father went to the law school there. My son went to the Lincoln Center campus. My daughter went to the law school.
Wow.
So I have an old connection with Fordham, and I really like it. I think it's a great school.
Well, this is how come I keep reading, like, he's a chronicle of New York. I'm like, oh, like you like not only in books, but also in the whole family in your life.
Yeah. Well, they came in 1847 and we never got out of New York.
I
say they started on 7th Street and I was born 177th, 100 years later. So they were the laziest immigrants in the world, or they love New York.
It's so interesting. And because, so I know my family's history back to the 1300s, including to like once we got to Boston and like our travels. It's a unique and privileged position to have the ability to sort of reach back that far. But it's also really, I think for me, it's fascinating to be able to like trace, like, holy, like we moved around, but you guys were in one place. Right. So you have like an Appalachian history where like it's 200 years of family stories.
Yeah. Well, my grandfather founded the Central Federated Union in the city. My father was in Congress for the Bronx. So, you know, this my life is wrapped up in, you know, in the 70s. And I said, everybody's leaving New York. It was going to die. I said, well, if it dies, I'm going to be buried here as the last person. I'm not going. I don't know any other place where I fit in.
Yeah. No, and I sort of feel that way a little bit about Appalachia, just because like when I go back to my family's homestead in Clay County, they founded it in 1806. The same families are on the street. The names haven't changed in 200 and something years. And so all I got to do is say, oh, I'm Virgie's grandkid, or I'm, you know, Bad Tom Baker's descendant. And all of a sudden that whole street, I'm welcome.
Right.
Do you have some of that? Like, do you have I guess it's probably, I mean, New York changes so much. Like, you've been there, but does it still feel like?
Well, I went to, you know, school. I got classmates here. I got friends I grew up with, the police department, fire department. and I'll meet them. We'll have little reunions and stuff. But not a lot of people moved away. That's the other. Most are in the New York area.
Yeah.
Like, uh, it's fish out of water when they leave New York. But
I mean, I love New York, but I feel a little bit like that when I leave Appalachia. I'm like, I mean, people are people, and it's the 21st century. We travel around, but also, you know,
people tell me I have an accent. I said, no, I don't. You have an accent.
yeah. I always tell people when I was in California and people would bring that up, I'm like, you sound like you're on TV. I sound like a real person.
I'm normal. I
Yeah,
talk normal, as they say.
yeah. So how does it so one of the things I'm always interested in, particularly people that write historical fiction, is what was the lens that got you into that? Like, obviously you have family history there, but were you researching something, or is that just something that you always loved? Like, how does that happen?
I always loved history, and I was studying for a doctorate in history at Fordham when I wound up being a speechwriter for the governor. So I was first for Cary and then for Cuomo. I was 6.5 years in Albany. And Albany can be a tough town to find fun in. So I pretty much stayed in my hotel room and got books out of the library, was sent away for books. And I sent away, I don't know why, a remanded book from the University of Kentucky by a guy, Adrian Cook, about the draft riots, which I knew a little about, worst urban disturbance in American history. And I got the book, and they used to say like 1,200 people died in the riot. But Cook went to the morgue and he got the names of the people who died. And there were about 120. It was probably twice that number because a lot of bodies weren't recovered. So I look in the back, I go down. First name I see is Peter Quinn. Shot dead on 34th Street. I'm like, my family, the Quinns weren't here yet. My other side was here, Manning's. And I said, what is this? My name in a history book is shot during one of the greatest riots in America. So that started me off. So I was going to write a history. And I went, I spent a year investigating. This was the result of the Irish immigration. 1 million people came across South Street, one of the greatest immigrations in history. Poor people, uneducated, rural people, and they changed everything. So my idea was to write history. And then I realized as I did it, I can't reach the people I want to reach. I can't, there are no voices. These people disappeared from history. They're relying on a census or in a parish record. So I began to think, the only way I can reach these people is in a novel. I have to make it up because it's not there. And I had this experience. I found out Stephen Foster, the great American songwriter, was in New York. He was one of the first great celebrities and one of the first great has-beens. And he wound up on the Bowery in a Fleabag hotel. The building is still there. And I went down, and I never did this before in my life. I went down, I stood in front of the hotel, and I said, I can't reach him in history either, but I think I know who he was. I'm not saying I had a psychotic experience, but I felt I knew him, and I said, I can't reach him through history. So I began to develop these characters. And then I had real characters, like some of them are real, but others are invented. And, the novelist, I said, people would tell me, oh, this didn't happen or that didn't, you making it up. I said, well, a novelist is a liar.
Right.
Novelists are professional liars. They go into people's minds. You
Yeah.
don't know what's going on in somebody's mind. But it's the great freedom of the novelist. So I wrote Banished Children. It took 10 years because the research took 6.5 years. I couldn't get out of the research. I just kept discovering this stuff. The building of the Croton water system, which is one of the great public works in the 19th century. The city couldn't exist without it. And everybody took it for granted. Nobody realized what it took, what it meant for the city. So I spent, months investing that. And then the introduction of the flush toilet.
Really?
One of the great revolutions in history. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a wonderful museum in New York, the Tenement Museum. It's one of the few museums in the country devoted to poor people. And it was built in the 1860s. And you go down to the yard, there were privies there, which was what most people had. And next to it was the water tap. So it was pretty guaranteed people were going to get cholera. And the upper classes suddenly had, sit in the bathroom was warm. You could take you could take a dump in one place and then flush it. It was one of the, so I had a character who's on the toilet for a long time. And thinking about all these things, he's a gold operator, because that was the big speculative market. And so one critic, I hate critics, said I was the only writer in history to give a character hemorrhoids.
So how do you go from And I'm sure you haven't listened to the show, but we talk about critics a lot on this show. So that's, I get that. Like, when you're studying to become a historian,
Right.
like that's one kind of writing, right? Like both academic and historic, like nonfiction writing is one kind of like, how do you make a pivot? Because they're just not, I mean, they're not the same. I mean, they're sort of the same, but they're not the same. Like, how did you go about doing that? Or were you just making it up as you went?
Well, a friend of mine said there are only two kinds of writing: good writing and bad writing. I was a speech writer for the governor. I was working on budget reports and things. In graduate school, I published 2 articles in historical journals. And I was one of the things I asked myself: how do you jump into fiction?
Yeah.
And you just close your eyes and you jump off the cliff. But one thing I did, I never took a writing course. And I read a couple of books on writing, but they were all telling me how other people wrote. I said, I
Yeah.
want to. So I went to school on novels I really liked.
Yeah.
Thomas Flanagan's Year of the French. William Kennedy, I became a fan of his. And I looked at the books and I said, how do you do a flashback? How do you mix scenes?
Yeah.
Like, I learned from reading. I don't know how any novelist isn't a constant reader. I think you
Yeah.
have to just read and read and read. And I have books over here, like notebooks filled. I would copy a paragraph out.
Yeah.
How is this done? How is
Yeah.
this done?
I have told the story many times. When I was learning how to write early in my career, I sat with Gatsby and I sat in his coffee shop and literally copied all of Gatsby by hand into a notebook just to get, because I was a poor kid, like just to get the feeling of like, what does it even feel like to write something like this?
Yeah.
Um, you have to pay really close attention to the words and the structures when you're doing that.
Right. Well, there's this romanticism about writing. It's a romantic profession. It's just work.
Yeah. Only by people who aren't writers. Writers are like, it's monotonous and terrible.
When people at Time Warner used to say, when I retire, I'm going to do what you do. Like I say, yeah, go up to the attic alone and take a nail and drive it into.
Yeah. Yes. Anytime people would say that to me, I would always ask them what they do. And then I would go, oh, yeah, when I retire, I'm going to do that too.
And I mean, there were times, Banished Children of Eve, it became an obsession with me. I kept the manuscript in my desk because when I was at Time Warner writing speeches, you handed the speech to people and they dumped all over it and went to the legal department, the accounting department. And in the initial stages, I got upset about this. Then I got this novel and I got up at 5:30 every morning and worked for 2 hours before I went to work. And it was in my bottom drawer. I said, you can have the rest. This is mine. You can't touch this.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's interesting. Like I've told folks, like being a magazine writer, because I worked at Wired, sort of in the middle of this sort of transformation. Once you start working with professional editors, like, I mean, you turn in a thing and that's not the last thing you're turning in. Like everybody's going to have some thoughts and opinions on it. And so it must have, that training of writing for other people must have also made it a little easier, right? Like I put that in quotes, like easier to handle feedback and stuff like that, because you're getting it constantly from people who did not care about your feelings at all.
Right. Yeah. And that's the other thing. William Kennedy talked about renewing your vulnerability. That's what a writer has to do.
Yeah.
At some stage, people are going to dump all over it. So, Banished Children of Eve went to 13 editors. And like, I got these stinging rejections of people who sat down and actually tried to be mean. But then I got Viking, Penguin. I got 3 acceptances, and that's all you need. You just need one that gets it.
Yeah. Well, and it's such a weird profession, because this is another theme on the show. Like, there's not really a way to be a writer. Like, if you want to be a doctor, you go to medical school, and it's hard, but at least like, we'll go do this. As a writer, everybody's like, how does this happen? Right. Like, well, how does this work? Yeah. And so, like, everybody sort of finds their way into it in these weird ass ways.
Yeah, I know.
And so you end up, that book comes out.
What? I should have turned the phone off.
Yeah.
I just turn it off. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. You know what? My dog makes appearances on the show all the time. So
my dog's locked downstairs.
But he was diagnosed with cancer, so I now sort of let him just run around. Like, he gets to do whatever he wants to do now. So after you do that, why do you make the terrible decision to continue being a writer?
Yeah, I know. Well, I said the only thing worse than writing is not writing.
Yeah.
I mean, if I write, come up, I'm in my office now. I sit down, I start working. Some days I don't get anything out of it. Some days I do, but I feel like I'm not doing what I should do if I don't write.
Yeah.
So,
So let me ask, and we'll sort of end with this. It's the book is being reissued.
right.
Why is what's the timing for that? Like why did they decide to do that now? Because it was an influential book. It was a book that was critically lauded. Like
Well, one of the things is they felt that history caught up with the book. That the society we're in now, the economic insecurity, the racial question, immigrations, they're all back. I always say, I took my son to Gettysburg way back, and we saw all these Civil War reenactors there with the uniforms, the
yeah,
muskets, everything. And I said, it's interesting, the worst urban disturbance in American history in the middle of the Civil War, and nobody tries to reenact it. There's never been, cannons were in the streets of New York. And I said, they don't have to reenact it because every couple of years we do it again.
yeah,
Riots and, the things of the 1860s are still with us. The
yeah,
immigration problem in the 1860s was the Northeast coast. Now it's the Southwestern border. Economic inequality was one of the things that drove the riots, and the racial question, which we used to be in a post-racial society. We now know that's not true.
yeah.
And I think of now as racism is the COVID virus that we've never found a cure for.
Yeah.
Keep
Well, and I think one of the reasons I love talking to historians and people that do historical novels and nonfiction stuff, and it's the oldest cliche in the book of history, which is people forget that these things did not just arise today, and it's really hard to have conversations about them unless you understand all the tentacles that run through all of this,
Yeah.
because you just hear people saying, well, I'm not like that, and you're like, well, that's not the point.
Yeah.
you
Well,
know, and you are, but that's not the point.
human nature hasn't changed in 100,000 years.
Yeah.
And I always said a famous quote by George Santayana: "Those who don't learn the lessons of history are doomed to repeat them."
Yeah.
Well, we're doomed to repeat them because we're human beings, and our nature never changes. We just do them over in different ways.
Yeah. And I think a lot of I think some of that is because I think I can only speak for America. I've traveled, I've spent a lot of time in Europe and stuff, and the history of your, like, what my writing partner lives in Berlin. Well, when you're in Berlin, the 40s are not that far away. Like they've erected and kept things there, not as a celebration, but as a reminder, right? Like, and in America, we literally bulldoze things over, and it's like every 20 years there's a whole new thing. So there's no even physical memory of what these things were.
Well, the other thing is, European cultures are already made. They're finished. They're made. That's what they are: French culture, English culture, German culture. They have academies that look at the language. America is not finished yet. We're still making it up.
Yeah.
New immigrants come in. We don't have a settled culture. Even our popular culture changes all the time.
Yeah.
You can't keep track. And that's a great, I think, strength of America, the driving thing, that we're never finished. We're always doing something else. Cancel culture. We're canceling cultures all the time. We
Yeah.
have since the beginning. The revolution canceled the British culture.
Yeah.
The Civil War, everything is, but it's a strength of America. We move on.
Yeah. Well, and
I
it's
have great faith in this country. People say, we're going down. No, we're not. The more turmoil we have, the stronger we are, I think.
I mean, it does see, it does, to that point, it does feel like as we get into valleys, which I think we're sort of in right now.
Yeah.
But there's always a road ahead. Like, you always sort of, like, at the end of the day, because we changed so much. I was on a radio show in Atlanta the other day talking about this, and, like, I don't have a tremendous hope that we're going to come out of coronavirus and suddenly everybody's going to be like, oh my God, we need to, because I don't trust us. Like, I don't trust people, but there's enough of these small pockets of things that, like, you begin to see hope. And it's like, well, it's not I'm in Pittsburgh, so I have to quote Mr. Rogers. Like, you look for the helpers and you go, well, if we look over there and if we follow that, yeah, we're not going to fix everything, but we're going to be on a better hill than we're in today.
I always told my kids, if you're in a room where everybody tells you only one thing can happen, or something's destined, get out of there as fast as you can.
Yeah.
The first thing you learn from history is there are no inevitabilities. There's curveballs all the time, and knuckleballs.
Yeah.
It's just amazing. And that's, one of the things that writing a historical novel, and it's hard, is you have to cancel the future. To get in the character's minds, you can't know the future. You have to pretend you don't know how the Civil War is going to end, or how the draft riot's going to end. And if that seeps into your head, it kind of ruins things. I was always with the characters following up to this riot. I said, they don't know that Gettysburg is 5 days away. It's not in the vocabulary. Uh, and we don't know now. It's to put us yourself in the position where you are now.
Yeah.
Who could have predicted COVID, right? Now it will be assumed to have a certain inevitability. Well, there are no inevitabilities.
Right. I mean, everybody was posting that. So Bill Gates gave a talk like 5 years before coronavirus, and they were saying, like, look, this is what's going to be the next big pandemic. He didn't know what it was going to be, but look, it's going to come out of this because this is the thing we can't fix. Right. But this also, and so, yeah, he didn't know this,
Right.
but we do sort of like, and I think maybe as a historian, you'll tell me I'm wrong, but I think when you're immersed in those kinds of things, you do see where the waves are breaking. You don't know what the actual shore is going to look like, but you're like, well, I see some things that might be coming over the horizon.
Right. Those are the prophets.
Yeah. The book is coming out is it out now or is it coming out in June?
It's been out for a month.
Okay.
I have 4 novels, and the other novels, there's a series of historical detective novels, one of which takes place in Berlin.
Oh.
Hour of the Cat. And they're 3 with the same detective. And then I took a book of essays. So, I mean, I just write all the time. A writer isn't necessarily somebody who gets published, it's somebody who writes.
Yeah. I tell people that all the time. Like the publishing, this, like the publishing world is made up of so many different flavors. Like if you're not a writer, you think like, oh, there's publishing. And then you get into it and you're like, well, that's not true.
Right. The guy who sat in back of me at Manhattan College was James Pattis.
Are you kidding me?
He was my classmate. We're in the same English class.
That's amazing.
We were at an alumni thing. I said, Jim and I together have sold 300 million books.
Yeah.
So 299 million. Yeah. But he writes in a totally different way than I do. We don't write. He writes.
Yeah.
My first book is 600 pages, and his are small 3-page chapters. But
yeah.
You do what you do, and no, writers don't write the same way. That's another part of the business.
Yeah, and it's anytime I tell, like, I think being a writer, the hardest thing to do is to find your voice and to find out where that voice fits in the publishing landscape. Because when you find that partnership and that sort of that group of people that get what you do, it's a totally different thing than if you are trying to like, oh, I really want, Harper to publish me. And you're not really a writer that's like that's when you start banging your head on the wall and it becomes a terrible vocation.
Well, they say you write for your audience. I say absolutely not. Write for yourself and let the audience find you.
Yeah.
Because if you're writing for an audience, first of all, you don't know who the audience, you can't be sure it's going to be. And I think that's a formula to be a hack.
Yeah.
For the audience. You got to find it inside yourself, and you have to have the courage and faith to believe your audience will find you.
Yeah. I can't remember what comedian said it, but I've kept this in my head my whole life. And he said, I never ask who's going to think this is funny. I always tell myself the right people will think it's funny. And that's who I tell the joke for. So anytime I sit down to write, I'm like, the right people will find this funny.
This is the 3rd publishing of the book. And I'm always amazed. Every time it comes out, I find a different, a new audience. There were kids who were growing up when the first volume first came out, and now there's a new audience for it with new perspectives. So, and I think that one of the greatest satisfaction of being a writer is when a character you created out of nothing comes alive in somebody's head.
Yeah.
It's just, you can't believe it. They're actually a real person for that person.
Yeah, 100%. Like it's the joy of, I've talked about on the show, like it's also how we develop empathy, right? Like I think it's through fiction that we are able to really place ourselves in stories that aren't ours. And you can begin to, like, no matter how old you are, you begin to sort of see other things, which is,
that's absolutely true. What you just said about the empathy you develop as a writer. I always say, the novelist is God. He creates things, and you kind of create characters. And if you've done it right, you watch them do things, and you almost say to them, "Don't do that."
Yeah, it's I write nonfiction, but whenever I'm writing, it's a movie in my head. Like I tell people, like you do the research, and then it just to me, I'm transcribing this thing that I see, and I don't know if it's become I come from an oral culture, and so I'm used to like we literally sat around a campfire and told stories. So like. You can't do that unless you can see everything.
Well, we sat around burning buildings.
I mean, it's just a different flavor, Peter.
Actually burning. That was my youth.
So this has been fantastic. I could literally I could talk to you for hours and hours and hours. Like, just looking at your bio, I was like, oh my God, like we could have spent a whole day talking about being a speechwriter for Cuomo, like, which I will not make us do. So the book's out right now. It's been out for a month. Anybody can get it. And then you also got the 3 books that are so is the collection of your work the 4 of the books?
Right. Well, this novel's out now. The 3 detective novels will be out next fall, and my book of essays, Looking for Jimmy, will be out the following spring.
Oh my gosh, you've been super productive in the pandemic.
And I'm trying to. I'm writing my memoir now, and I kind of said writing my memoirs. I said I'd never do it, but now I'm doing it because I'm 74. I'm running it. And I said, I had a more interesting life than I remember.
Yeah. It's I can just tell you, like, just doing the little bit of research that I did, it sounds like an absolutely fantastic life.
It's been a good ride. I'm grateful.
Good. Well, it has been wonderful talking to you. I cannot wait to pick up this book and read it because New York is such a fascinating place to me, and historically, just where we are right now, it feels like a really good thing to be reading. Oh, you got the cover right there?
Cheap self-promotion, and there it is. Banished Children of Eve.
That's great. Thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for the time and for your conversation.
This is great. I can't wait to catch up again soon.
Maybe our paths will cross someday.
That'd be great.
Great. Thanks, Brad.
That was Peter Quinn. You can pick up his 1995 American Book Award winning novel, Banished Children of Eve, a novel of Civil War New York, right now. Before we get out of here, just a couple reminders. If you like what you heard or watched today, do us those 2 favors. First, leave us a review wherever you listen or watch this podcast. Tell your friends about us. While you're at it, don't forget to check out the other programs on the Solid Listen Podcast Network, including the flagship Mother Mass Sleep with Podcast with our host and Solid Listen Podcast Queen, Molly McLear. Don't forget, these video podcasts come out basically every Monday and Friday as we do them. They're always on the Solid Listen Network YouTube channel, or if you want to hear just the audio, check that out wherever you listen to podcasts. And the Jam is out every Wednesdays, so make sure you are subscribed so you never miss an episode. And remember, you can always catch us on Twitter and Instagram at The Writers Jam. Until the next time, I will see you around the internet.